Hello and welcome to this latest episode of Chasing Creativity. I'm Kiran Mandral, and today I have with me a very dear friend and a wonderful writer, Richa S. Mukherjee. Welcome to the podcast, Richa.
Thank you so much. So happy to be here.
My pleasure completely. And Richa, I know you for a while, and I know that you are one of those writers who comes from an advertising background. You moved into writing books. Your journey into writing came about quite as by chance, luck by chance. So tell us a bit about that. How did it all happen?
Before I start, I would like to take a sidestep and congratulate you on the name of the show. I've been fascinated by it. I tell you, it's a bit of genius because I think you've tapped into every possible emotion in the ecosystem of creativity or people who call themselves creative, right? It's maddening, it's elusive, it is frustrating, and it can make you feel like you're on a high and dump you to the ground, the next minute. So I think it is essentially that you're chasing creativity constantly. And if on one fine day there's one bloke who comes up to you and says, wow, you're creative, I love your work, your internal mechanism is going to ensure that the very next minute you just look at what you do and it's absolute utter crap. So I think it's brilliant. And we said, in essence, we're all chasing creativity all the time. I certainly am. There are certain people like her who've done incredible stuff with her words and her mind, who I think have dropped some of the emotions along the way. But for the rest of us, it's always, I think, life is about chasing creativity all the time. So
That's
lovely,
what-
lovely title.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. But now to get back to you.
Yes. I come from a very eclectic background where people have had various tastes in reading and pursuits in life. My dad was in the revenue services. We've chatted about this. And what it did, traveling as a child, I think it gave me a whole host of experiences. And it gave me a certain perspective on the world and how people are. And, it's almost as if I had my own seat to the world because there was so much of movement and change around me that I was just pretty much an observer. And I keep mentioning this, that, at an early stage, what it does to you as a person is it makes you pause. And then it gives you all your own perspective on the world. And I think that is very important I didn't even know I'd ever be able to write. But I used to write, all of these observations used to come out through poetry, very sad sounding poetry, which was only written for my father at the time who used to travel. But my means of expression was poetry. And I was an absolutely avid reader. There was Mills and Boons coming from my sister and Kamla Das, and my dad would talk to me about
That
the
is
scriptures.
quite a
and
spectrum.
Yeah, quite.
You're talking on Mills and Bones and you're talking about Kamla Das.
Yes, absolutely.
So from one kiss that goes on for 6 pages to Kamla Das was getting into it like...
and Anita Das, where she talks about one bird sitting in a tree and there's a descriptor going on for 20 pages. So it's but it was wonderful because I went through my phase of those Georgian romances, and then there was thrillers which were a constant always. So I think my imagination as a writer was pretty much marinating at that point in time. And I was exposed to these experiences and poetry and words and the beauty of, I think one of my most favorite things to do was look for new words. Mm-hmm. And we've traveled extensively. I come from, I was born in Kanpur. So, when I speak now, people, think it impossible. But there was a point in time where I did not have a command over the language as I should have at the time. And when I went to Calcutta, I still remember in the second standard, my principal came up to my father and said that she's gregarious, she's nice, she's good in her studies, but English, that's a problem. So my dad would sit me down and, make me just ask me to pick up one word and then the whole etymology of it and the thesaurus, and I would, just go exploring the words. So there was a love for words, I think, that was seeped in very early on. And it was spread across English, Hindi, and, across languages. And I think that kind of helped me in good, kept me in good stead till the time I realized that maybe there's some story within me, which came at a very chaotic time when I was on my, maternity break. Didn't really have the time. There was only chaos and diapers around me. But, a story had to come at the most inopportune time, but it came. And it was a chaotic time, but the whole writing of it was very, very unencumbered because I think that was my release at that time. So I wrote the book, and it was pretty much sitting around. That is when I wrote. I was experimenting with other formats of writing. I was writing short stories, and that's where I entered this competition, Write India, with the Times of India, and I happened to win one of those. Came in the top 10. That's when I met Ravinder, and that's when I made a horrendous pitch, the shortest pitch and the most cringy one I ever could. And I said, "Look, I have a book. You might want to publish it, but I don't know if you will." So he said, "I think you were trying to pitch to me. So send me your manuscript." And that's where this whole association with Ravinder and Harper started. And, it's been a 4-book long journey. I keep coming up with these bizarre ideas. And I must doff my hat to you here, because if there's one of those writers who has not let any genre intimidate them, it's you. And no, genuinely, I genuinely feel that, we'll leave this world soon enough and we'll just regret that we haven't said all the things we had to. And this is one thing I just, I genuinely mean it, that I've enjoyed reading all your books. I've gifted them to people. I have made my husband read 2 of them. And I pretty much, was inspired by that. And I just let the story pick me. And I don't get intimidated by genres now. And I just feel that when there's a story to tell, in fact, we were just discussing that I'm in the middle of a story. And again, it's one of those experimental ones when I can't really pin down the genre. But and again, she told me not to think about it too much and just go with it and finish it. And I'm going to do just that. So
Brilliant.
In a very long... in a very long way, I hope I've answered your question. I've just meandered quite a bit. Sorry.
No worries. Looking forward to reading that one when it's done.
Thank you.
You spoke about Kanpur as the place of your birth. And now Kanpur is a very prominent character, I would say, in your Prachanand Tripathi books. Tell us about how did you come up with this idea of this detective who is not your typical detective, who's a small town India person, living in a house with his extended family, family is making pickles, there's a cow, it's a lovely setting. It's absolutely slice of life there. How did he come to you, and why did you decide that I'm going to have a male detective? Because you're writing in the male voice now. And it's difficult, it's not impossible. I mean, Agatha Christie has done it and so many have done it. But we tend to, as first-time writers, stick with the gender we're familiar with or we've grown up as.
Sure.
So how did you come up with the character? What were the challenges in writing from a different perspective, genre-wise? And how did it work for you?
So we like to intellectualize when we're thinking back. But honestly speaking, most of the story ideas are a very in-the-moment, impulsive kind of thought, just comes to you and it's so sticky that it remains. I remember I was passing this detective agency somewhere near Nasik. Mm-hmm. There was this cute little logo of this very supposedly clever looking Lomdi, and it said Poxy Detective Agency.
Oh,
and I just couldn't stop laughing. And just that, as a tiny trigger as that, after that, I just could not wait. There was a story forming in my head. Most of the times, the story comes to me in a very, very thin log line, as they say in screenplay parlance. It's a very, very thin line. And whenever my husband is the first one, I bounce these off. And he heard the story and he said, "Yeah, so what? It's about a detective." He said, "No, just let me write down the characters." And that is when Prachanand Tripathi came to me. That's when somehow everything I remembered about Kanpur, everything I had heard over, the storytelling to my dadis and nanis, everything just came back. And somehow I knew that I was so familiar with this context that these characters endeared themselves to me even before I'd come up with an entire plot. Mm-hmm. So somehow that world was really familiar to me. Like you said, maybe Prachanand Tripathi and the fact that I was writing from a male gaze, and that was a little bit of a challenge because, as you said, the first book was what I wrote as almost like a dear diary of Tara, who is going through a pregnancy, and it was contextual for me at the time. Kanpur Khufia Private Limited was a challenge from many perspectives because it's one thing to like reading a genre and be a fan of the genre since you're a child, and it's another to write it. Secondly, I was trying to balance two absolutely incongruous emotions, which is a release in terms of comedy, and then you're trying to create that suspense through it being a thriller. And of course, I was writing as a man. But that is, I think, that was a bit of a training ground for me. And if you're not, I feel that every single book I write, it's almost as if I've passed one class, and and because that's exactly what it was. If we continuously write what we are familiar with and what we know, then it doesn't feel as much of a. It's not as if I was an underripe, Paulo Coelho or Deepak Chopra looking for a challenge or something, but it just felt as if it was a challenge, worth taking. And writers, if nothing else, we're great empaths, right? We know what it is to stand in other shoes, in different perspectives, circumstances, and soak that in. And I just realized that if I truly allowed myself to be Prachand Tripathi and just bring alive in a very evocative way this entire world and all the characters and these cows and dogs and everything that's happening around him, that it would be enchanting for people to read. And I hope I've been able to somehow do that.
You have, of course. What is interesting is your first Kanpur Khufia book was comic mystery. So, as you said, marrying the disparate elements of crime solving along with a little bit of humor, there is a challenge in that. In your next book, you added one more element. You added horror. What made you do that? Because you've got comedy, you've got crime, you've got horror. Now, these three are very difficult to marry.
So, tomes have bden written about how to approach a particular genre, what are the tricks and the tropes which make a particular genre effective. As somebody and that's why it's so important to read, right? Because somehow you're not even able to articulate exactly how you're separating, each of the genres and, cherry picking what you need to make a good story. But because you have consumed so much of it, because you have absorbed so much as a reader and marinated all of that inside you, somehow they all each find a place as and when. What I knew when I was bringing together the horror element in Curse of Kuldhara was that I will not be able to do justice to it as a as a book in the horror genre. What I decided was that I would keep to these two elements of humor and thriller, and I would use something that I absolutely love, another genre. I think the older I get, in some silly way, I'm shedding my inhibitions, and I keep thinking that if I just keep bringing to my books what I genuinely love and I enjoy, then that would make, for better storytelling coming from my pen. So horror was missing, and I desperately know, and I know you've written Face at the Window is one of my favorites as well. And how you've made it so visceral and so contextual. I wanted, to use this whole cursed village and that entire setting as a backdrop. And then there's so much you can do in terms of suggestion, in terms of suspension of disbelief. You can take liberties. So I wasn't looking at it specifically as marrying three genres. I knew that I had the story to tell and I was balancing humor along the way. And I knew that once I entered this whole realm of Kuldhara, if I was just true to where the setting and the story and the lore and everything, it would, I would be able to pick certain elements and make it work for the rest of the story. So I had a lot of fun writing it, honestly. The biggest disappointment was that I had this whole trip set up just before COVID. And then Kuldhara, I couldn't get out of my own door. So that pretty much collapsed the plan. But then I guess what bigger horror than what we were living through at that point in time. So I think I channelized that. And that's when Curse of Kuldhara happened.
So you researched all your Kuldhara information online when you were doing this book?
All of it, in Google Earth, and then there were a lot of friends I had who belonged to some royal families from there. So I think the Dadi was sick of me. She must have spat every time my call came through because I said, can I please speak with her again? Then there were a lot of these authors. I forget this gentleman who's very, very famous. Vijay Dasena or Dasana, he's one of the very popular folk writers there as well. So there's for a lot of the rural lore and all of that. So I read 2 of his books as well. So I think it was all a mixture of that. And, I heard these very interesting tidbits about how people feel about the weather, and that's another thing. I took the context of it, and then I took liberties because it's horror, and I changed it all around. So it's just like small bits and elements. But like I said, I was having a lot of fun writing, so I was experimenting, and I think that's what made it interesting for me.
As an ex-advertising person, how much did your training in advertising help you creatively when you switched to writing books?
Firstly, I was extremely apologetic to every creative team member I'd worked with, because this expectation of being creative at the drop of a hat, it just doesn't work. And we used to take these terribly written briefs to them, and try to assimilate an entire universe into some really badly written one page, and expect them to just produce these amazing creatives. But like I said, they were chasing theirs, and I was clearly chasing mine, and clearly the two didn't meet, because I met them, and Nitesh Tiwari and Ashwini, they're making films now, and the entire their team that I worked with, every single time I meet them, I just keep telling them, I'm sorry. It isn't easy. It really isn't. So I first purged myself that way. And but I think there are lessons that I took in terms, because I was in the firstly, I used to hate client servicing, because it made me sound like somebody in a harem, servile. But in the account management helped me in the sense that I was always lying in wait, whether it was the client, whether it was creative, whether it was any other function. So I did not realize that in some prescient way I would be preparing myself for this industry, which can be summarized as one interminable wait.
Absolutely.
It's like lying in your grave. The euphoria comes and goes, but then you're always waiting. If it's not just for the readers, for that's at the end of this joyous tunnel. Before that, how it is. It is an interminable wait. So patience.
It starts with waiting for the muse. Then it starts for waiting for the editor to reply.
Gosh.
List it out.
Oh yeah.
Let our
then
listeners know.
Publishers, publicists, the bookstores that don't stock you, wherever you go. I don't know, you mentioned that you're an author, and everybody has this, this rainbow imagery of, you flitting in and out of lit fests and signing books. Yes, I'm not going to be ungrateful and say that those are not interesting and sweet things, and you become part of this entire community, which I've actually enjoyed more than anything else. But gosh, it's hard. I was recently at this, there was this wonderful event that was organized called Founders and Leaders, and there were women representing different aspects of business. And then when it came to us, and we were like, I'm not really an entrepreneur. And then we looked at each other. I think Meghna was there as well. And I said, what? It is running your own business, because you are the whole, wholly and solely responsible for everything. Not just about creating the product, it's about the motivation to create the product, and then selling it, and then seeing it through, and then marketing it, and then promoting it, and then finding enough of a mind space to go back to creating another product line, if you look at it very dispassionately, and minus the stars in your eyes. So it's really, really hard. It's like running your business every single day. And I think something that we also have to fight as women constantly is this whole aspect of the self-deprecating that you were doing. She's gorgeous, and every time I give her compliments, she's always saying, So the whole point is, the self-flagellation that we do, especially for women. Imagine that. So we're carrying that along with that in our heads. There's this somebody saying this, sitting on our shoulders and chattering away, saying what you're doing is horrible. And imagine not that for the writing. Every step of the way, it's almost torture. It's torture, but it's a torture that I guess has, bears its fruit at the end of it in terms of the satisfaction it gives you, and when you're writing, and that I think holds us for the rest of the process. But yes, it's taught me a lot of patience, and I think I was always a very, very humble person, but gosh, humble pie is a new concept. It seems it's new because there's more and more of it coming.
Yeah.
But so, which is why I think that there's this word in Hindi called sthita pragyata. It's like, basically you need to know where your center is. Because if you don't know where your center is, then you'll just be tossing around every single day, and you'll feel terrible at the end of the day, and you won't know how to get started again in the morning. So I think it takes a lot of inner fuel to keep going, and I think those are the lessons that I've also taken on.
Yeah. You spoke about the self deprecating bit of being a writer or being any creative person.
Yes.
Another thing that I'd like to go into in specific to women is the mommy guilt and the lack of, I would say, space or the lack of aloneness that comes with it. So, how have you faced it? How do you deal with it? You have an adorable daughter and she's very talented. She dances Kathak as you do. She plays the tabla. She's, I think, quite an all rounder from what I see on your social media. So there's the challenge of raising a child who is so gifted and so creative. There's a challenge also of nurturing your own creativity and being true to your creativity and your creative process. How do you manage to juggle both?
Um, I always summarize it in one single sentence, something I have said to myself when I found myself in dire straits or in situations where there is no alternative. My sisters and I, when my mom was unwell, we set up this group, which we still have, and it applies to us in all situations. No other option. When you genuinely do not have any other option. And look, we're fooling ourselves if we're saying that, we romanticize this whole thing about. It's great, it's wonderful. Of course, I love being with my child. Of course, I love doing creative things with her, spending time with her, having her around when I'm working. But we know what state of mind you need to be in, right, when you're doing that work. So there are times when there is a negotiation, and some of it is barter, some of it is related to, it's absolute bribes. And other times there's conversations saying that, this is my workspace. And she is mature enough to, understand that, sometimes I need that mind space. But then again, we're dealing with a 10-year-old. So I do miss it. And then I see these wonderful writing retreats that all of these, I don't know, male writers have. And I just wonder, Neil takes off, we know, to do his writing. One utopian, land, time where I've identified some writing escapes for myself. I can't really say, I guess I'm impulsive and I keep changing my mind. So I can't say that once I'm there and I have all that peace, I'll be able to write any better, because I'm used to a chaotic kind of writing in the middle of anything. But I do feel I want to try that because, writing that is devoid of that kind of noise and, that kind of environment, maybe it's better. And I really don't know. Haven't had access to it. And there's a lot of our friends we were just discussing who are able to go to retreats, and a lot of our male friends have done that as well. But I am yet to get to it. But I would really like that. So as of now, like I said, there's no other option. So I do it, and I can write anytime, anywhere. I'm sure it reflects in my writing as well. So I do want to go to one of those places far away from home and write, and then come back. And
I work in chaos myself too. Domestic chaos, regular chaos. And every time somebody sees you sitting at the computer, they think like she's doing nothing. Come, let's have a conversation with her. So I think if I went to a place which was a retreat and which had complete isolation, in fact, I did go many years ago. It was in the hills. It was lovely. There was complete isolation. It was very quiet, and I didn't write a word.
Didn't write it. I'm scared. I
did
fear
not
that.
write a word because that silence was too intimidating. I think when you get used to the chaos, I don't know. Maybe now I would be able to. Maybe at that point, my son was really small, the age your daughter is. So I was used to that constant noise. Now, like when you have to WhatsApp him to figure out where he is at in the course of the day, your conversation on WhatsApp, you have a lot more quietude in your lives. That brings me to another point. How is your writing day like? You work in chaos, but do you have like fixed time periods carved out from your day that this is the time she's in school and I'm going to write, or this is the time I come back from the gym and I'm going to write, or how does it work for you?
So you have to be a little more disciplined, I guess. That's what I found, because I found that if I let the day unfold as it, wants to, and try and look for spots to write, then I'm an angry hound by the end of the day, and it's nobody else's fault but mine, because I can't expect everybody else to change. It's me who needs to be a little more disciplined. So now I have carved out certain portions of the day. I know once I have worked out, I'm in a better state of mind. And those 3-4 hours that I get, and I'm sure if Anika sees this, she'll be wondering if she's the only one who brings chaos to my life, so you don't. Uh, so before she comes back, there's already a lot happening, but those 3-4 hours I find in the afternoon, that is when I'm at my productive best, and I'm able to segregate, other kinds of writing I need to do and the work around it. And then even if I have a good 2.5 hours, I think for me that is good enough, because another thing I was doing was I was driving myself crazy trying to be very productive. And then when I fell short, it was causing a lot of frustration, and that was spilling over into many, many other aspects of my life. So now I've realized that as long as, I am writing one chapter, I forgot the lady who made that famous quote that, if you have one chapter, it's better than no chapter at the end of the day. So I have small goals. And if I can take those off on a daily basis, of course, when there's a fire under your derriere and there's a deadline, then it's different. But like I said, most of the time we're on our own steam, right? So for those days, smaller portions, smaller goals work for me. And if I stick to that slot, I'm fine.
Lovely. We've mentioned workouts now, so I must get into this question. We have Haruki Murakami, who spoke about what I talk about when I talk about running. We have other writers who are known for their walks, long, rambling walks that they took every day, hour-long, 2-hour-long walks. We have you, who's very into fitness and working out. We have Neil De Silva, who's a runner and who's done I don't know how many marathons and whatnot. So I don't know about the rest, but
You're working out a lot yourself. I know 6 a.m. runs. I'm seeing all of that. Yes.
So anyway, this is not about me, but is there a correlation? There is a health factor definitely, because we are sitting at the desk all day for most of it. That is not good for your back. That is not good for your metabolism. That's not good for everything. But do you feel there is a link between the endorphins of working out and creativity? Do you think it has helped you in any way in that space?
I think we all know the benefits of what happens inside the body when we're working out. So that's proven anyway. I think in conjunction with that, what happens when you come to a space which is, whether it's a run or, whether it's the gym, it is a space where I think which is devoid of any responsibilities in that sense. Where you enter that space. For me, when I walk in those doors, I'm not thinking of anything. So along with what's happening to my body on the inside and those endorphins, I think there's a big sense of relief that comes from, there's nothing after this, there's nothing before this. And for me, it's a lot of mindfulness at play. And when I'm in the moment, because if I'm working out, if I'm focusing on my weights, if I'm running, I'll fall on my face and break a bone if I'm not concentrating. So even though I am focusing on a particular activity, somehow that quietness inside my mind, combined with, the whatever endorphins are working, brings me to a very, in yoga they talk about shunya. And shunya has nothing to do with the amount of noise outside you, it has to do with the inside. So I find that becomes a very conducive space and quiet space for me while I'm working out, because I'm thinking of nothing else except what I'm doing in the moment or picking that weight or whatever. And oddly enough, even though I'm concentrating on something, it creates more space in my mind. So I was recently reading about, watching this documentary about a study where this doctor was analyzing, those peaks and troughs and the curvatures of the brain. And they analyzed it, for people who are very busy with their lives and very stressed. And they analyzed it for people who work out a lot and meditate. And apparently there are more grooves and more undulations for people who do the latter, which means the brain is able to accommodate much more and deal with much more if you have that sense of, control and calmness about you. So, I think that's exactly what it does for me. I don't know how many grooves I have in my brain, but at least when I'm in that space, I know along with the endorphins, this sense of calmness descends over me. And that really helps me prepare my mind for the kind of writing that is to come. And it just helps me feel a little more in control of myself, which I don't feel like for a large part of the day. But when I walk out of there, there's this big grin on my face, and I know that something good is going to happen. That definitely happens to me while I'm working out.
Lovely. So that's important, I think. I think physical exercise, whatever you do. When you're a creative person, it is an integral part also of your creative process.
Absolutely.
And I think it's very underestimated, and I'm glad we spoke about this. Finally, Richa, what are you working on now?
I have, in fact, I'm working on the most dreaded thing for every author. I am currently working on the marketing of my 5th book. So, as you can see, I'm really enjoying it, not. But I mean, the joy of bringing something new into the world, that's keeping me going. So I'm, it's a story about secrets and family and friendships. And it's a story about a mother and a daughter. They're the central protagonists, leading this humdrum life. And something really untoward and crazy, happens along the way. And while their life is unraveling, because of this particular event, there are some other secrets that come tumbling out, that the daughter finds out about her mother. So, all wrapped up in humor and, some thrills. So, I'm really, really looking forward to getting that out into the world. I haven't even spoken about the title till now. I don't know if people will feel very, if my publisher will feel irritated that I did, but I don't think there's any harm in it.
When is it coming out?
It's coming out sometime this month. So the title of the book is first time ever. It's Vigilantes. Vigil Aunties. Yes.
Very cool. Very cool.
So I am really looking forward to that. And as far as writing is concerned, there are certain projects that I'm learning. I mean, at this age, again, I keep telling myself that I guess every year I find a new challenge for myself. So I'm learning to write for screen. So there are a few projects that I've, been asked to write for screen. So I'm teaching myself screenwriting. But my first love will always remain books. So I'm working on the book that unfortunately got my 6th book, which got deleted last year. And I'm writing it from scratch. And, I guess lacking a little bit of motivation, but after chatting with you today and Kiran encouraging me, I think I will get back to it. And writing every day and just trying to tell the stories that are cluttered in my brain.
And we look forward to reading them all. Thank you so much, Richa, for your time, and all the very best for Vigilantes and the book you're writing, which got deleted, and which you wrote again, which means it has to come out in the world.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much for having me.